Morning. Hi, good morning, everybody. All right, we today is Daf Gimel and Erevin. We left off at the bottom. We were discussing. We had this halacha when it comes to a mavui, an alleyway which is not really a rishus yachid. It's not a rishus rabim. There's basically people's private properties open up into this area, this alleyway, but we want to separate, people want to carry, so we want to separate that from the public domain. So you put up a korah, a beam that goes across on top. So we're discussing the dimensions of the beam in terms of where it can be located. And so the Mishnah is machlokes says whether it has to not be 20 amos and lower. And machlokes Rabbi Yehuda says no need, it can be higher than 20. And the Rabbanan say not. So then Rabbanan will work according to Rav. Rav states that the Rabbanan learned their halacha from the Heichal. The Heichal, the entranceway to the Heichal in the base of Mikdash was 20 amos. So that's what we see as a Pesach. So too, this mavui, the korah that goes across, and the mavui, that in order to make it a quote-unquote Pesach, an entranceway, should also be similar dimensions. In other words, not more than 20 amos. So bottom line, on Beis Amud Beis, Elamiata, turn the page, Lo Tihani Le, Amalatra, right? So it should not help an Amalatra, right? And in other words, what's an Amalatra? The Heichal Amalatra Havile. Now, is basically the Amalatra is basically something that was designed over the doorway, right? Different I guess designs. We'll soon see what it is. The English type here is basically a prominence. Those who have a picture on the art scroll. Right, it looks a little bit, I don't know if I can get there, right, a little bit of a design above, so it makes it more noticeable. So now it says over there, if that's the case, by the Heichal, so the Heichal also had, it was 20 amos, and it had an Malatra. It had this design above it, right? So Daha Heichal Damaras Havi Le Yafilachi Asimama Hu Digavod the Tanan Chamesh Malatras Shel Mila Hayu Agabav. Right, there was 5 different beams across the lowest beam, sort of like a design that went wider and up. And Zo Lamal Mizu, each one was higher than the next, so it was higher and higher. So sort of like this design above that made it more noticeable. But nevertheless, the halacha was, right, the Pesach was only 20 amos. So if we learn from the Heichal, so if one has an Amalatra over his mavui, right? So why does the halacha, if the one has an Amalatra, it can even be higher than 20 amos because it's more noticeable, right? If we learn from the Heichal that had Amalatra and it was maxed, and the height was 20, so we should learn from there. And the Gemara says, "I v'hai ma'itziu." The Dilma kitana hi Amalatras be'ulam tanya. Maybe over there, that Mishnah over there in Midos, right, wasn't referring to the entranceway of the Heichal. Maybe it was it was an entranceway to the room outside the Heichal, the Ulam. Maybe that only had this prominence in front, but not the Heichal itself. What do you mean? So maybe they're both the same and they had it. So if you have a korah that's wide, it says of a korah, if it's wide, arba, even though it's not as wide as a bria, which is a half brick, right? So that's okay. If it's over than 20, it's no good. But if it has a malatra, then it's okay. So what do you see over here? That a malatra, according to this brisa over here, states that once you have the malatra, as we'll soon see, it makes it noticeable, and therefore, even if the korah is above 20, it's okay. So Rav Yehuda say malatra masnisai. So that was another brisa. That wasn't the opinion of Rav, who says maybe that's another brisa that is different, right? And that had nothing to do with Rav. It was just it wasn't Rav's statements, right? There was what do we say that? It wasn't Rabbi Eloi Amar Rav, right? Maybe it was just said in the name of Rav, and Rav would argue. Rav says if this has a malatra, then since we're going for the Heichal, it has to be the same. So Gemara says, "Saman Ketanila." So who's the one who taught this brayso? So Rabbi Chama Bered Rabbi Baruch Ketanila. He wrote it. The Rav. Okay, so even Rav didn't write it. It should be a kasha according to this brayso. We see that if Rav learns from the Heichal, So therefore, even if it has a malatra, if it's more than 20 amos, it has to be lowered. And according to this brisa, if it has a malatra, it has this design above the doorway, it can even be higher than that because it's noticeable. So our answer is, even if you take me out of this equation, do we not have a contradiction in brisas, right? That one seems to say if it has a malatra, that it can be higher than 20. That one says even if it has a malatra, still can only maximum height is 20 and no less, right? Which is our Mishnah. So he says, so therefore, even according to me, it's a machlokes tonight. You can't ask a kasha and Mrs. Rav from one brisa because I have another brisa which supports the fact that even if it has a malatra, so the maximum height is 20. So it turns out it's machlokes tonight. So we know it has to be 20, and if it has a malatra, it's machlokes. If it has a malatra and it's more than 20, is that good enough? Is it noticeable enough to still make it a Pesach? Or do we say you have to lower it down to 20 or less? And Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar below Rav Mas. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar below Rav so Masnei Sa'adadi like kasha. It's actually not a kasha even without Rav, right? Because he said like this. What's the reason going Rabbanim? Mishum Hekera, because of a heker. It doesn't mean that we actually learn from the Heichal. It means it's a Simana B'Alma. In other words, the whole point of that we want a 20 or less is that people recognize it, people notice it. So when you're walking through, you say, "Oh, I'm about to enter into the public domain, and I can no longer carry." Right? If you walk into another area and you don't realize you just stepped out of that domain, you're going to continue carrying. So we want people to realize it. So therefore, if the height is 20 or less, then it's noticeable. And the reason why he says the heichal, not because we learn the halachas in the heichal, right? If you learn the halachas in the heichal, even al-macha doesn't help. Really, we don't learn the halachas in the heichal. So if that's the case, why do they say it 20? They just said a way to remember 20 amos. They had to pick some sort of height, right? An objective height. So therefore they said 20 amos, and a way to remember it is like the heichal. Just like the heichal was 20, so too the height of the Korah is 20, but not necessarily was the heichal a source for the halacha that it has to be 20. So
could it be regarding the 20 amot? Perhaps it's more beside the heichal, it's more chashuv, the shade, the sun, reflection that we say regarding the sukkah, really perhaps that's the source. Rather than the hechal happened to be 20, but it's probably the source is more the shade that you can see or not. That's why we said 20 amot in the sukkah.
So,
you follow me?
Right. So we're soon going to see, right, so the Gemara is soon going to discuss in terms of the difference between the height and what is the relevance of the height. So let's see. You're getting onto something. Let's see. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, according to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, if you don't hold like Rabbah, it's okay that if it was, we just have a flat out number that this is the number, and the Rabbanan say, okay, it has to be 20. Like the Rabbah, if you hold like Rabbah, see if it says over there by a sukkah, it says Lamani did the Rosekam Kivasugos Shafti. So the pasuk says, in order that you should know that you're in the sukkah, right? It's the Ades Yamama Adam Yodeh should have a sukkah. Lamalam Yamama and Adam Yodeh Mishum Jelo Shalta Ba'ina. When it comes to a sukkah, if it's more than 20 amos, so in other words, that's just a number picked out, nothing to do with the heichal, has a number to do with the people notice it, right? Up until 20 amos, you realize you're roofed, right? If it's higher than 20 amos, it's too high, you don't even look up, you don't realize it's roofed. And you're not going to notice it. Alma, what do you see over here? Okay. Sukkah, what is it? No. So Alma, Gabi Sukkah Nami, back here at Pligi. So what do you see over here? By a sukkah, they also argue. Now, it's just like by the sukkah, they argue as to, in other words, what height is a noticeable height to the eye. So too, by the mavui, it's a height also has been noticeable to the eye. So that's so the hakir nami please. That's the case, b'tarti lamali. So why do you have machlokes in both cases? Why do you have machlokes in the case of the sukkah, and why do you have machlokes in the case of the Korah? Just say it once. So the Gemara says tzricha. No, you do need it. Why? If we just had it by the sukkah, Rabbi Yehuda. In this case, Rabbi Yehuda says it can be higher. Why? Since you're just sitting around there, you're going to be sitting it, inhabiting it. Therefore, you're going to notice the ceiling. You're not moving around. an alleyway, the hiluchabed, which is made for walking, maybe you'll say they'll agree with the rabbanon that that he'll agree with the rabbanon that no, only up to 20 because you're walking, you're not going to notice anything higher. If we just have the case of a person walking the mavui, maybe maybe only that case that's the rabbanon said you need 20. Aval bahach, but and now it's machlokes Rabbi Yehuda also aval bahach. But in the other case, maybe in the case of the sukkah, since you're sitting around, maybe you'd sit around and you notice even a schach above 20 amos. Therefore, and maybe they would agree with Rabbi Yehuda. Therefore, it's stricha. Therefore, you need the machlokes in both cases that both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan stick to their shitas, whether it comes to the height of the korah or it comes to the height of the sukkah. So now, my amalatra. What is this amalatra? So Rav Chama Amar Kine, he says it's like basically a design of nests, bird's nests. And Kiyas Rav Dimi Amar, they said, no, Piske Darizis. It's like cedar woods, long cedar poles that were basically, this prominence were above the doorway. So some says it was noticeable, the cedar poles. Certainly people will notice, right? If it was nests that were basically drawn in or etched in. But if the one opinion who says kine the nest of alpiske darazalo, but not the cedars, that wouldn't be as noticeable. So speaking of those, so why are those noticeable? What's the reason why those are noticeable? It just seems to be like wood planks on top, or wood poles. Because since I guess they're expensive, people will notice and people will discuss it and they'll say, "Oh, look at those! Those are cedar woods and those are very expensive, right?" So my time, she says over there because they're very long. What do you mean? But the sukkah is also long. It's the entire roof, right? So the entire roof, the sukkah is long, entire roof, and we say that. There wouldn't help over there, right? Something on top of the schach, right? Let's say the schach was higher up, but you had like these cedars above the schach, it wouldn't work. Since it's chashuv, right? People will discuss, right, these long poles, and therefore, since they'll be discussed, therefore will be known, and therefore it will be noticeable. These korah on top of one's head. Fine, 2 dots. Now, new question. Miktas kaira b'seich esrim miktas kaira l'malam yesrim. So we discussed the height of 20. Now, let's say you have your korah beam right over here, and you measure from the ground up to the korah, and right over here, right, the 20 amos is right in the middle of this korah beam, right, in the middle of the beam. So what's the halacha there? Does it have to be completely below the 20? Can it be right at the 20? Can it be in the middle? So what's the halacha there? Makes this kara b'seich esrim, makes this kara l'malam esrim. Or another case, makes this schach b'seich esrim, makes this schach l'malam esrim. Let's say you have thick schach. Your schach's 4, 5, 6 inches thick, and once again, the exactly 20 amos go is like the middle of the schach. So some of it is above, some of it's below. So Omar Rabba. So he says that we're going to have 2 different versions. So Omar Rabba b'mavui kasher b'sukkah pasul. In the case of the mavui, it's okay. As long as someone's at the bottom, it's fine. But in the case of the sukkah, then it's pasul. Why? So ma'ishna b'mavui the kasher damrinan kalish. Because we say basically you cut it off, and therefore you just look at the bottom. The beam is there. So sukkah lema kalish. So I understand. So the sukkah also say cut off the top, and you have the bottom of the schach, which is below the 20 amos. See, kalish is havi lechamas meruvat. So I understand. If you cut off the top of the schach, then you're not going to have enough schach. You're going to have more more sun than shade, and therefore it's going to create a pasul sukkah. So that's why you can't just imaginary or halachically cut it off. So hakanami iklishas lehavi lekara hadin tasa beruach. If that's the case, you're going to have a beam. If you cut off the top of the beam, anything that's above the 20 amps, you're going to have a beam that's basically that would blow in the wind, and when it blows in the wind is not considered to be good as a korah. So okay, so we'll say fine, the beam it won't blow in the wind. We'll say basically like it's a metal rod. So even though yes, we are chopping this wooden beam or whatever you put on top in half, but if we imagine it to be metal, it wouldn't blow in the wind. It wouldn't shake. It would be very sturdy. So the Gemara says, so hakanami. So to say the same thing about schach. Okay, so by schach also say just like you imaginarily made the bottom part of the beam to be metal and therefore it's sturdy, we'll say imaginary part of the schach make it imaginary, make it that more shade than sun and should be kosher. So what's the difference? Samarava mi parzakia sukkah del yachid hi here's the difference. In the case of the sukkah, which basically everyone has their own sukkah, person's not going to recognize he's there by himself, right? He's no one will point it out to him. However, the rabbim with people will, I guess, tell one another. People will tell one another if it's there or not, and therefore it's more noticeable, even if in the case of the korah versus the case of the schach. So therefore, the schach, all of the schach has to be below 20 amos, as opposed to the korah. Even only part of it is, it's okay because people mention it. And Ravina Omar, and Ravina says, no, another tear, sukkah deraisa, chmir Rabban. Since sukkah is deraisa, therefore machmer to make sure that all the schach is below 20 amos. However, mavui derabanan alayich chmir Rabban. But when it comes to a mavui, right, since the putting up this beam is only a midrabanan to carry this area, so therefore midrabanan we're more makel, and therefore we weren't machmer, and says the entire beam, only part of the beam has to be within 20. That's fine. So that was one version. And Ravada bar Masna Masila Lashmaitz the Rabba Ifcha. He actually learned a different way. So Amar Rabba, he says, in the case of, once again, same question. If you have a mavui, half of it is below 20 amos, half of it is above, or the case of schach, half the schach is below, half the schach is above. The mavui puzzle. In the case of mavui, it's no good because all of it is not below. In the case of the sukkah, kshera, but a sukkah is okay. So my shna sukkah the kshera. Why do you say, but the sukkah if half of it is above, it's still okay? Damrina kolish, right? We say, basically cut off the top, and it's like basically, so it's like, whatever was above 20 amos, pretend it's not there, and therefore you're just left with 20 amos and below. So he says, but in the case of the mavi, also say it's kolish. It's cut off. So ikalish is havi le kaira. I understand it. Well, if you cut off the top of the beam, it's like it's not gonna be sturdy. It's gonna be something that blows in the wind. And we know that a korah, the beam that blows in the wind, is not good. So Achanami, I understand. Same thing by the schach. If you cut off the top of the schach, you're not gonna have enough schach to cover it. You're gonna have more sunlight than shade. So Elo Akorcha, what do we say over there with the case of schach? We make it magically like it's we consider it as if there's more shade than sun. So so over here, why don't you say it's halachically also? We imagine it like this beam is the bottom part of it is metal, and therefore it's sturdy and doesn't blow in the wind. And on this, Amar Rava with Parzaki, he says no. Sukkah del yachid, since a sukkah is made for a single person, Rami anafsha umidker. He basically, since he's by himself, he's more noticeable as things, right? He sits around, it's his own sukkah, therefore he looks around, and therefore he'll realize that part of this, that he'll see the schach, and he'll see, even though some of the schach is above the 20 amos, he'll still see that too. However, in the case of the mavui, to the rabimi, that since that's a public, people don't really pay attention in public. They rely on others to do, to make sure everything is right and to notice, and therefore they're not going to really notice it. They won't recognize it, right? I mean, like people say, Kedera debei shutfi loy chamime veloy karira, right? If you have a pot which is owned by two people, it's not hot or cold. In other words, that if you have a pot that's two people are in charge of it, so both of them are going to assume the other person is going to be in charge of the pot. No one's going to take ownership, and therefore nothing will happen. So too in the case of the mavli, no one's really going to notice it because they're going to assume everyone else is really, dealing with it. Ravina Omar, and Ravina says no. Sukkah deraisa lo b'chizuk. Since sukkah is deraisa, we don't need chizuk. It's okay. They're going to be careful to at least have some of it below 20. And mavli, however, mavli is derabanan. Since that's a derabanan, therefore by chizuk, therefore should some of it. If you only have some of it below 20, it's not good because people might have the entire thing above 20, and therefore the halacha is by the case according to the second version, the mavli is puzzled, but the sukkah is kshera. So my Haviala, so no, what's the maskana? Half and half. What do we say there? So Rabba bar Rav Ula Omar Zev Zev Puzzle. He says no, they're both puzzle. If you don't have the entire schach or the entire beam under 20 amos, it's no good. And Rav Omar Zev Zev kosher. No, they're both kosher, even if they have part of it. Why is that? Chalal sukkah tanan, chalal mavui tanan. Why is that? Because that which we talk about the 20 amos, it means the chalal means airspace, right? It means the airspace, right, below the beam, right? It's not just we measure up to 20 and it has to be above. No. The space we measure underneath here to here. If that's less than 20 amos, it's okay. So if it's 19.9 amos, it's fine. Even though the 20th is going to be here, the airspace is not more than 20 amos. So as long as the airspace underneath is not 20 amos, it's all good. So therefore, even if you have a korah that's 1 amma thick or a tef or whatever it is, so it doesn't make a difference, because as long as part of it goes into the 20 amos, you don't have an airspace of 20 amos, and the same thing by a sukkah. And Amar le Rav Papa le Rava, says Rav Papa, Tanya Misailcha. I there's a brayso that supports you. Mavu shugavo me'asrim amos. If you have a mavui that's above 20 amos, which is more than the height of the entrance, you might, right? Then you have to go ahead and you should lower it. All right. The heichal gufa cholo asrim. And the heichal itself, its airspace was 20. In other words, that the beam across the top of the entranceway of the heichal did not start until 20. Once it was 20, then it began. So therefore, we see, obviously, you don't have to have the entire beam below 20. As long as it starts, right, at 20, you don't have any space more than 20 underneath it, then it's fine. So Eisvei Rav Shimon Rav Ashi the Rav Papa. So Rav Shimon Rav Ashi has a kasha Rav Papa. Okay, so how they do minich kara misvas esvei v'lamata. So what would they do? They would put a beam from the edge of the 20 and down. So Ema Ulamal, say above. What do you mean? If it was at 20 and then they put it underneath it, in other words, if they measure out 20s right here, and then they take the beam and they put it underneath it, well, that sounds like that the top of the beam has to be at 20, not the bottom. So Gemara answers, no. So Ema Ulamal says, no, it means they measure 20 and then they put the beam not under, but on top. Right, they put on top in order that the space underneath it is not more than 20. It says lamata. No, so we learn from there that under is over. Just like we say, when it comes to the maximum, it has to be 20. So too, the minimum, right? We say the lowest amount is 10. It doesn't mean that from the top here down is 10. Rather, it means from under here is 10. So you have to have basically 10, and then on top of that is the minimum. Otherwise, it's not going to be noticeable as a entranceway. Fine, 2 dots. Amar Abaye Mishmei de Rav Nachman Amos Sukkah the Amos Mavui be Amma Bas Chamisha. When we talk about the Amma, all right, we really didn't discuss. I think I brushed up on it yesterday. I said approximately 1.5. So it's made up of, an Amma is made up of Tfachim, right? Tfachim is approximately 4 inches, right? It's your hand breadth, right? It's a standard size, and not just according to each person's fist, it's standard size. And machlokes as to how many Tfachim are in an Amma. Is it 5 or is it 6? Okay, now, that which we talk about the Amma of a Sukkah, and that which we talk about the Amma of a Mavli, is Amma Bas Chamisha, is an Amma made up of 5 Tfachim. And Ammas Kilai, when it comes to measuring Kilai HaKerem, vineyards and others, to separate areas of growing vines and areas of plowing, let's say, grains and stuff like that, and wheat, right? When it comes to that, that is Ammas Kilai Ba'ama Bas Shisha, right? That's Amma of 6 Tfach. So Ammas Mavi Ba'ama Bas Chamish L'may Ilchza. When we say that, that's not where we explain. When it comes to an Amma of a Mavi, it's only 5 Tfach, and L'may Ilchza, what does that do? So the height. So no, it's actually a Chumrah, right? Because let's just in theory say a Tefach is 4 inches, right? So if you have 4 inches, right? That's 20. That's 20 inches is a tefach. If you hold it 6, right, then it's 24, right? So therefore, something which is the height of 20 inches is 400 inches, right? So therefore, the maximum height is 400 inches, right? If you say that it's 6 tefachim, then it's going to be 480 inches, right? It's going to be up here. So you see that if you hold that Amma, when it comes to a mavui, is the 5, in other words, it's because we're being more machmir, right? We're making a chumrah, right? So therefore, Amra, so we say over here, so Ammas mavui ba'ama bas chamish l'mayach. So the gova, its height, the pirtzas mavui, or let's say there's a hole in the wall. How wide does the hole be? Ai ba'ika meshech mavui. Oh, what do you mean? There's also maybe the depth of it. The depth of it is be'arba amos. You say it has to be 4 amos. Now, if you say it's how big is the amma only of 5 tvachim, then de la kula. Then it's a kula. In other words, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be deeper to be 4 amos of 6 tvachim. It only has to be 4 amos of 5 tvachim. So it's a kula. So command the Amar. So okay, so in that case, actually we hold like the one who says it doesn't have to be 4 amos deep; it has to be 4 tefachim deep. Same way you can say be'arba amos v'roi b'amos. Maybe means most cases, right, are an amma of 5 tefachim, except for if it would be a kula, then we say that no, you be more machmer and use one of 6 tefachim. And amma sukkah be amma bas chamish l'mayach. So what are the cases of sukkah? What do we say? It has to do with that. So the gaiva, right, for its height, as we discussed, has to be 20 amos. And the dofen akuma, and also dofen akuma, we say dalat amos. We have a case of a dofen akuma of basically either skach that it goes through skach pasel. We'll say in the second sukkah. But basically, we say that you don't look at let's say this. Here's the wall, and actually this is good, right? We'll say this brush right here. This is the good schach, right? And here's a wall. So we since over here. So, but this part next to the wall is not a good schach, right? Let's say it's metal, right? It's no good. So we say no. We say dof and akuma. It's like the wall here, like bends across here and makes contact with these schach. So how far does a wall magically bend if it's schach puzzle? That is up to dalat amos. And those 4 amos we're only talking about. It has to be an amma of 5 tvachim and not an amma of 6 tvachim. What do you mean? And delakula. What do you mean? If you hold that, what's the minimum space of a sukkah? According to one opinion, it has to be 4 amos by 4 amos. So therefore, you should require the larger amos, the one of 6 tvachim, not the one of 5 tvachim. So therefore, that's the kula. So he says no. The Tanya we learned in the Brayso. Rabbi Yomi, so Rabbi Yomi says, any sukkah that is not 4 by 4 amos is no good. So the Gemara answers no. Kirabanan most holy Rabbanan. Even if it all doesn't hold 4 by 4, but rather it only holds enough space for his head, most of his body, and his table, then that's sufficient. And the Gemara over there explains that that's 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, and nothing to do with dalad amos versus dalad amos. Or you can say, what does it mean when we say by sukkah? It's the amma of 5 tvachim. L'yelam Rabbi. Or really you can say you hold like Rebbe has to be 4 amos by 4 amos, the Rov amos kamar, and it has to referring to Rov a majority of amos. Fine. So that was the case of Sukkah. That was the case of Kara by an Eruv, and we see that normally when it comes to there, we hold like the more machmer opinion when it comes to an amma. So typically we'll hold like the opinion holds that over there, if we're talking about maximum height, only we're using an amma of 5 tefachim, not 6 tefachim. However, when it comes to kilayim, amas kilayim, the amma bas shisho, then we're more machmir. When we need to distance things, so we want a larger space to distance, right? Because we don't want to go ahead and mix the seeds or the roots of the vines and of the wheat. So therefore, we over there when we talk about amos, has to be a certain amount of amos away from one another. We refer to the amos as comprised of 6 tefachim. So the karachas hakerem. Right, when it comes to the karachas, like the bald parts of the vineyard, a certain part of the vineyard cannot be worked, and there's a machlokes between Beis Hillel and Shammai, and also the edge of the the vineyard. That's now we learn in the Mishnah. Karachas hakerem. When it comes to basically a bald spot, right, in the vineyard, so Beis Shammai oimrim esrei v'arba amos. It has to be an area of 24 amos, right? 24 amos between the vineyard from one side to the other. That cannot be planted in by the vines. And Beis Hillel amos has to be 16 amos, right? Those of you who have the pictures and the art scroll. So there's a machlekes between Beis Hillel and Shammai. The total amount you see when he says a work area, according to those pictures, it referred to the area of the plow. The plow typically takes up 4 amos. So therefore, in order to plow back and forth, you need the space there. So according to Beis Hillel, you have to have basically a clearing in the inside of 8 amos, and then 4 amos for the plow on each side. So 4 plus 8 plus 4 is that of 16. And Beis Shammai says, no, you have to have 4 amos plus another 4 amos on the inside on each side. Therefore, it's not 8 in the inside, rather it's 16. And 16 plus 4 and 4, according to Beis Shammai, is 24. And therefore, you need a clearing of 24 between the 2 sides of the vineyard in order to plant on the inside, right? of the according to Beis Shammai in order to plant, let's say, wheat there. And then it says it comes to Mechol HaKerem, the edge of the vineyard. So Beis Shammai Oimrim Sheish Amos. Beis Shammai says you need a total of 16 amos because you have the space over there. You have the 8, which is usable, plus the 4 and the 4, plus the 4 and the 4, right? Which is right was 16, right? And Beis Hillel Oimrim Shtei Amos. No, all you need, you don't need the 2 sides. All you need is 12 because you have the wall there. You can't work by the wall, and then you have the area that you can plant in, which is 4 amos, and then you have the area that you leave alone, which is used for the plow to walk back and forth. So therefore, it's a total from the place of where the vines grow, right, from the vineyard to the edge of the wall. That is a total of 12 amos. And according to Beis Shammai, right, you have to have the first amos next to the wall that has to be basically support of the wall. You don't plow there because that's an area they, it's do not enter the 4 amos there. And then you have the 8, according to Beis Shammai, 8 amos of area where you can plant, and then you have another 4 amos out of there where you walk the plow. And as the Gemara explains, as the Mishnah over there explains, right? An AC Karachas Karen what was the first case we discussed in Karachas Karen? So that's Karen Shachar Emtiyah. So that's referring to a vineyard that is empty in the middle, right? It's empty in the middle, and that's what we're talking about. If you have a vineyard empty in the middle, then you want to go ahead and plant on the inside. So you can plant on the inside, depending if it's at least 16 according to Beis Hillel and at least 24 according to Beis Shammai. And Ein Sham Sheish Amos Lo Yavi Zer L'Sham. If you don't have 16, you can't bring plants there. Hayu Sham Sheish Amos, but if you can, nice in Lakadei Avadas of Ezeres Hamaiser. You can go ahead and clear out the space that you're going to go ahead and plow over, and then the rest you can go ahead and plant it. And what is the Mechol HaKerem? What's the edge of the Kerem? So that's been Kerem Gedra, that's between the vineyard and the wall. And Ein Sham Shtei Esrei Amma, according to Beis Hillel, if there's not 12 Amos between the wall and the edge of the vineyard, Lo Yavi Zer Hashem, you can go ahead and plant there. Hayu Sham Shtei Esrei, Nais Nakadei Avados of Ezeres L'Shad. However, if there is 12 over there, then you would, if it's at least 12, then you can go ahead, 12 amos, then you can go ahead and plant. So these amos that we're discussing are the amos of 6 tfachim, and therefore more machmir. You have to make sure you have enough space to separate the vines from the area you plow. So Gemara says, I
have a question, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So we're going to hold by Beis Shammai in this case, most probably, right?
No, Beis Hillel. We go hold like Beis Hillel.
Okay, so we're holding by Beis Hillel, and the vineyard is always, in both pictures, the vineyard is always on the outside, is that correct? Never in the inside?
Well, we're talking about, let's say the area is a known vineyard, and then you have an area in the middle that was destroyed, and I want to plant something else. So how much of a space do I need for me to be able to plant something else? That's the question here. Because you're once again, you're not allowed to grow wheat and vines together. So, but if there's enough space, it's not called together. It's called separate because there's enough space in between. So if, let's say according to Beis Hillel, there's enough space where I can basically grow an 8 amma patch, because if you have an 8 amma patch, you have 4 amos on each side. That is considered to be enough separation on each side from the vines and from the grapes that are growing there. All right. Now, the Gemara just has one other case was, okay, but if you hold the 6 tefachim per amma, then maybe you have a kula there. Why is that? But let's say you have an area of 4 amos, and inside of Dalet amos, there's rows, right? There's rows there. The Tanakh we learn in the Mishnah, if you have a vineyard, right, that's less than 4 amos between the different rows, and Rabbi Shimon Omer, ain't a kerem, it's not considered to be a kerem, right? It's therefore, it's just since you don't have enough space, it's just considered to be vines that are growing there. And really, it is a vineyard, and we look like the ones that are in the inside, the rows that are inside, they're not spaced properly. It's not really part of the as if they weren't there. But we see, according to Rabbi Shimon, if he says that we look at these rows, so then over here, when it turns out that the rows that if there's space less, then if you hold 6, then we're more makil. In other words, because if it's less than the amount of space, then in other words, the space, the minimum requirement, instead of being right here, is over here, because he's using amos of 6 and not 5, right? So therefore, it's more space. So even though it's not spaced enough, it's still considered okay, right? When you're talking about spacing, so then you're using the 6, not the 5, and therefore, even though it's closer together, it would be okay. So Gemara answers, no, so either you can hold like the Rabbanan, and therefore you don't need to go ahead and, because according to the Rabbanan, we look like they're not there anyways, and therefore it doesn't make a difference how many amos we're going ahead and calculating, because it's, if it's 5 or 6, because we don't consider them to be there. And or we can say the same thing as we gave before, but even the same with even like Rabbi Shimon, most of the time we talk about using amos when it comes to Klei Kerem of 6 tvachim, but if it turns out to be a kula, then in such a case, then we'll use 5, as if, in other words, the minimum requirement of how close they need to be together. All right, we'll stop here towards the bottom. So tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, we will continue. Everyone have a wonderful